teams are lacking when you build a team through the draft and complement it with role-playing veterans, and that's exactly what I think Atlanta has. So this is definitely a team on the right track, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. And their pieces really do, as you said, complement each other very nicely. Collins and Young already have a nice little pick and roll game. Collins is going to probably play a lot of five this year, um, playing down low, getting those rebounds, gobbling those up, getting putbacks, etc. And he's been confident to say that he's developing his shot as well, which is really scary for opposing defenses. If he can shoot the ball and they space it around him and Trae Young in the pick and roll, I mean that will be unguardable. But I would be remiss if we didn't touch on a trade that looked great for them initially and that I was in favor of when they traded with your Brooklyn Nets and has since looked like another Sean Mark swindling in getting them to take on a bad contract and really not getting as much in return as it seemed like they might, looking at some of the other deals with Iguodala and some other guys. So they end up losing Torian Prince. I do think that's going to hurt them this year because they ended up replacing him with a guy like Jabari Parker. And this team actually, Jason, reminds me a little bit of the Bulls from a year ago, where I have some questions over the guys who are going to be playing backup roles and sort of be coming in off the bench. If they were to have an injury, I am not overly confident in the likes of Jabari Parker, Damian Jones, DeAndre Bembry, Alan Crabb. These are guys who have struggled a little bit as of late. I do wonder if that won't hurt them, especially in the regular season, where those guys do tend to play a little bit more. But we'll take those concerns away for 1 second and ask the bigger question, which is, what can we expect, do you think, Jason, from the rookies this year? Cam Reddish, DeAndre Hunter, expected to play a lot of minutes this year as rookies. Do you think they're ready to contribute right out of the gate?
I think Cam Reddish is. He slipped in the draft even though he was still a top 10 pick, a lottery pick. A lot of people thought he was going to go top 4, top 5. Didn't really have the best showing out in the NCAA tournament, which may have hurt his draft stock. DeAndre Hunter, though, on the other hand, coming from Virginia, winning the whole damn thing, coming in, he's going to be ready. He's going to experience some winning basketball. Both of these guys not far at all from where they played college hoops. Virginia, Duke, all right there, not far, a couple hours away from Atlanta. So I think that'll help. They're staying home in a sense, and they have a young team with no expectations. Now, I've been high, just like I've been high on the Pelicans in the West. I'm really high on the Hawks in the East. I think they're a playoff team this year. Well, I'm sorry, buddy, but I think that your Bulls are just one more year behind the Hawks. I think they're another year away. But the Hawks are ready, man. I think they can make a serious run this year, but it's going to be one of those Brooklyn-like stress and pressure free runs where if they make the playoffs, great, let's try and attract some free agents, even though the next couple of classes are really not that great. But I think they're going to grow from within, kind of like how the Warriors did it with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green all going through their growing pains in the league together. I think you're going to see these young guys grow together. And that's why I think the Nets-Hawks trade for Allen Crabbe, Torian Prince, and all that cap space is actually a coup for both teams because it allowed Brooklyn the cap space to sign Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, DeAndre Jordan. But also, by the time the Hawks need to pay John Collins and Trae Young their second contracts, and then behind them, Reddish and Hunter, Crabbe's contract's going to be off the books, and the Hawks can allocate, as a small market team, a lot of their cap space to these young guys if they're worthy and if the Hawks are a playoff team with their current core. So I don't think there's any pressure in Atlanta, which is why I think they'll be that much more fun to watch this year.
Good points. All good points. I think the one thing we haven't really talked about with this team, and it's where I think their resume as a real playoff team is going to kind of fall apart, is that defensively, they just don't have it. I mean, Trae Young is not a good defensive player. Herter, not great. Collins is okay. And while Hunter and Reddish project as good NBA defenders, it's unlikely that they're going to be plus defenders as rookies because very few guys are. So I think this is going to be one of the worst defensive teams in the league. So a lot of fun to watch. Might not win as many basketball games as we think, but There is one little extra silver lining before we get to their floor and ceiling, Jason, which is that the dunk master, Vince Carter, is back for one more year.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that he opted to go back to Atlanta. I mean, we were talking about the best available remaining free agents, I think, in mid-July, and he was on that list with a guy like Jamal Crawford and some of these guys that have yet to find homes. But Vince Carter's back. He's the elder statesman of the league now. That's hard to believe. He just loves the game of basketball. He's not a ring chaser. He's perfectly happy playing out the remainder of his career in Atlanta on a young, up and coming team. But will he guide this young team to the playoffs, or will he finally give in and be bought out of his contract in March to sign with a playoff contender and try and chase that ring before going into retirement? Because you look at guys around the league later in their careers that have latched on to playoff contenders like Gary Payton, Karl Malone, Alonzo Mourning, Jason Williams, Antoine Walker, Joe Johnson. I think Vince Carter's on that list, a bona fide Hall of Famer. I'd like to see him win a ring. Seem the type to just latch on to, let's say, the Clippers and coast into the finals. He wants to earn it, which is very commendable. But, he's going to go down as one of the best players in NBA history to never win a ring.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if him going back to the Hawks is a little bit of a tacit acknowledgement that maybe some of those other teams weren't knocking down the door to get him. And I wouldn't be shocked. At 42, he doesn't move like he once did. So defensively, I'm not going to say he's a liability, but he's not a plus defender at this stage of his career. So I'm not sure many contenders are going to be looking for him. I think this is a good fit for him. He can mentor the young players and get one more year in there. I doubt he finds his way to a contender unless he really plays well at the beginning of the season.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, Carmelo Anthony's still unsigned, and training camp starts Saturday. So, it is tough out there for these veterans. Jamal Crawford is not on a team, so, no, I totally get it.
Yeah, absolutely. But with that, let's kind of hit the ceiling of this team, because I think you kind of touched on it, and I think we're in agreement. I think the ceiling for this team is the 8th seed. They could make the playoffs, just squeeze into that last spot. Are you on the same page?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've covered 3 teams in this division so far tonight, and we could be looking at the 6th, 7th, and 8th seeds in the conference all coming from this division. If Miami finishes 6th, Orlando 7th, Atlanta sneaks in 8th. I mean, a couple of teams that were projected to make the playoffs would have to slip back a little bit, including your Bulls, but that's definitely a realistic scenario. Their ceiling being the 8th seed, nothing more. But this team's coming, man. Definitely something to look out for in the next 2-3 years.
I think on the other hand, though, things could go wrong this season for a number of reasons. I think the lack of depth and the lack of defense for me are probably going to be the reason why I'm going to maybe set my sights a little lower for them, probably more like mid-30s. Still a commendable improvement, but not quite enough to make the playoffs. That's sort of where I see them, and I do think that's their worst case scenario, but also a more likely scenario given where they're at and sort of the lack of defense that they have on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the over-under, Vegas or DraftKings has them at 33.5. This is a no-brainer, folks. Bet the over 110%.
Yeah, I agree. I think even if you don't think they'll make the playoffs, 33 wins seems like a pretty low bar for this team. A year ago, I mean, with everything that went on and without sort of all the stuff we're talking about and missing a number of games from John Collins, they won 29. So I think at least a 5-win increase is in the cards for them.
Absolutely. So this is the part of the show that I hate, because we are now about to cover 2 of the worst teams in the NBA. So listen, if you want to shut the show off now, remember to subscribe, rate, and review. No, I'm just kidding. Which one do you want to do, the Hornets or the Wizards? Because neither of these are going to be very fun, my friend.
Let's kind of talk about these together, actually, because I think that they kind of go hand in hand with each other, because they're really these teams that once upon a time were competing for a lower tier playoff spot in the Eastern Conference and now have fallen off. For the Hornets, the fall off is going to be quite precipitous this year because they were really a one-man team a year ago, and they lost not only that one man in Kemba Walker, but they also lost the supporting pieces, with guys like Jeremy Lamb also kind of heading for greener pastures. That has left them down to kind of the nuts and bolts of this team. They are not one of the more talented teams in the league. Meanwhile, the Wizards are basically the Hornets from a year ago, Jason. They have they have Bradley Beal, who is basically doing a Kemba Walker impression from a year ago because there's just not much else on the roster. So, I mean, it sort of feels like we're watching the future version of the Wizards in the Hornets right now, and one has to wonder if they might try to shift some things to avoid getting to where the Hornets are now.
So this is the thing, though. If John Wall were healthy, we'd be roping in the Wizards with the likes of the Magic, the Hawks, the Bulls, the Pistons. They'd be talked about because John Wall, when healthy, is one of the better point guards in the NBA, albeit his contract is an absolute albatross. But the Hornets roster is bare bones now. I mean, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Marvin Williams, how are these guys still in the NBA? You're basically looking at Nicholas Batum, Terry Rozier, Malik Monk, Miles Bridges, and a bunch of cast-offs. So if you're a Hornets fan, you're Michael Jordan, you are hoping and praying that both Malik Monk and Miles Bridges take step forward after being lottery picks in the draft 2 years ago and last year. It's very important that these guys, make strides in their development because if not, the organization is in way more trouble than we initially thought they would be in.
Yeah, I think the problem for the Hornets that if you're the Wizards, you need to learn from, and you need to learn from very quickly, is that they have not paid these guys for a year or two. They have contracts going out a couple years. I mean, Nicholas Batum is a lock to pick up his player option after next year. I mean, it's a $27 million option, and he's quite frankly just not getting that money anywhere else. That is a tough contract. Meanwhile, some of the deals that they had for guys like Marvin Williams and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, they're going to expire after this year, but they were a year too long, and Cody Zeller still has a year left in 2020 that's going to be at $15 million. I mean, those are just really pretty horrendous numbers. The amount that they're going to be paying this year is almost comical for how bad their team is going to be. Spot Track has them listed with $129 million in cap allocations. They're going to be trying to shave that off. The Wizards really, what they need to learn from the Hornets is how to avoid those deals. And obviously, they've already signed one with John Wall, the worst contract in the league, quite possibly. So they need to be very careful with everything else that they do. They obviously decided to bring back Thomas Bryant and give him some money. Thought that may have been a mild overpay. Not sure he was getting $8 million a year annually anywhere else, but such is life. With that kind of in mind, though, I'm not sure where these teams' futures are or what their present looks like. I know that one big problem for the Wizards will be managing Beal. So obviously Beal was very open with his desire to play more, to have a chance at getting All-Star nod, All-NBA nods, etc. Jason, how do you think that they should manage him this year?
I think it all depends on how happy he is in Washington because John Wall's expected to miss the entire season. So when you look around the NBA of disgruntled superstars that have the best chance of getting dealt, Bradley Beal's at the top of that list because there are a number of teams, even more so than Aaron Gordon, that would line up for Bradley Beal's services. He is in line for a monster payday, and the question is, will he want to stay in D.C. with a new front office there? They're saying all the right things. They draft Hashimura, but they are a couple of years away from serious contention in the East. John Wall's going to be half of what he was given the injury history throughout his career, making that kind of money. If the Wizards pay Beal too, they're going to be extremely hard capped and have nothing to show for it. So if I'm Bradley Beal, I have a career-altering decision to make, and if they lose him, they're going to have to blow it up, start from scratch, pretty much pretend John Wall's not even there, and try and just be real creative with the remainder of their salary cap space.
To borrow the Fran Fraschilla line, when he was talking about Bruno Caboclo. They're a couple years away from being a couple years away, I think, Jason, because